Your brain needs support, and new Ollie Brainy Chews are a delightful way to take care of your cognitive health. Made with scientifically backed ingredients like Thai ginger, L-theanine, and caffeine, Brainy Chews support healthy brain function and help you find your focus, stay chill, or get energized. Be kind to your mind and get these nootropic chews at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Hey everybody, Tom here. A few weeks ago we mentioned an episode about Gef the Talking Mongoose that confused many listeners because we never actually released it. But this week that changes. Up next is our original, never before heard pilot episode of Wanna Hear Something Weird about Gef the Talking Mongoose. Hey Laura.
Hey Tom.
Wanna hear something weird?
I sure do.
Where do you fall on the scale of believing that an animal can talk?
Well,
And I'm not talking about a parrot.
I'm picturing the rat from Ratatouille.
Yeah. Like that level of like cartoon animal level of conversational skills.
Well, I think it's a fun fictional tale.
Well, for one family in the 1930s, it wasn't so fictional.
Tell me more.
And they would have been very upset if you had said that you think it was fictional, because they had a mongoose that made their life a living hell.
A mongoose.
A mongoose. Gef the Talking Mongoose, to be specific. Now, I'm not, like, a mongoose is like a weasel, right? Do you know what a mongoose is?
I picture kind of like a prairie dog. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Did you ever see that Ricky Tikki Tavi?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Or that was a book too, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I just remember seeing that commercial all the time, or not commercial, movie all the time. I think they like kept showing it to us in school or something, which I didn't really get. And it was just like a mongoose fighting a snake. Not the whole movie, of course,
Yes.
but that was like a big part of it.
Yes.
So mongoose? Do you call them?
Mongoose.
Mongoose and snakes, I guess, are mortal enemies. I didn't know that they. Oh, I think there's a lot of mongoose in India.
Yes.
Along with snakes.
I know they're not. I've certainly never seen one in real life unless it was at a museum, like a stuffed one at a museum.
Right, I was gonna say, what kind of
like the Natural History Museum.
Okay.
But
you don't
no,
think you've seen one in a zoo?
I doubt it.
Unless they said that's a prairie dog, and it wasn't. It was a mongoose. But anyway. So yeah, I don't think mongoose are super common on the Isle of Man, but I don't know. They might be. But that's where this happened, the Isle of Man.
Okay. So we're in the UK.
Yeah. They call themselves Manxes, I think.
Who, the mongoose?
No, not the mongoose. the people who live on the Isle of Man.
Oh.
They don't just call themselves men. They call themselves Manx.
All right.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
But yeah, so this story starts in 1931, September, if that's important to you. James and Margaret Irving, they move into this farm. I guess it's like kind of a farmhouse. It's a house like in the middle of nowhere on the Isle of Man. And pretty soon after moving in, they start hearing strange tapping sounds and growls from the attic. And I mean, I just read The Exorcist, and like that's how The Exorcist starts, with like tappings. I feel like that's always,
the first sinister sign of something paranormal.
Yeah, but also that they kind of have to warm up or whatever. Like, all right, let's just do some tappings to
some just like initial creepiness.
Yeah,
to like
because if you just come right out and start doing like the real creepy stuff, I feel like you got to prime the people you're haunting, or because that's kind of what Gef did here. And Gef is spelled Gef, by the way.
Okay.
And that's because that's how Gef said his name is spelled.
Oh.
Yeah, it's
of course.
Not
naturally.
Yeah. So James and Margaret Irving, they're in this house. The strange tapping sounds and the growls from the attic eventually kind of evolve into gurgling sounds that they said sounded like a baby trying to talk, kind of.
All right.
Like,
That's creepy.
Or I don't.
That's what babies sound like to you.
Yeah, something like that. Look, I'm trying to adapt it to how a mongoose would sound with this.
Right, of course.
And, yeah,
it's very.
So you can't say I'm wrong. You've never heard a mongoose
that
making
is
baby
fair.
noises.
That is fair.
So eventually, what do you do? What do you do if you suspect you have something living in your walls that's trying to talk? What would be your plan of how you would deal with that situation? Or maybe you wouldn't. Maybe you would just ignore it.
So I would certainly not ignore it. Call the exterminator.
They didn't. I guess they had exterminators in the 30s.
Or they just had, sticks.
Yeah, well, they had mouse traps and stuff like that. I guess a mongoose you'd probably have to shoot back then.
Oh.
But I don't think they knew it was a mongoose yet.
Okay, so they're just they're hanging out at home, hearing
weird noises,
babies crying, and
babies trying to talk.
Okay,
and it's mostly James that's hearing this stuff.
And James is
the
husband. Okay,
yeah. He decides, and dad. They have a one kid, I think, which we'll get to later. But James decides, I don't know what this thing is in the wall, but I can tell it's trying to talk, and I got the time. I'm going to teach it how to talk. Why not?
So instead of hey, let's get rid of it, it's I'm going to teach this.
I don't think getting rid of it ever crossed their mind. We'll find out later. There's one of the two of the potential actual theories behind what was actually happening shine a little more light onto James and what he was all about and what he was going through at this time.
All right.
Besides just having a talking mongoose living in his wall. So he starts teaching the mongoose how to talk by just saying words over and over and having Gef repeat them.
Oh, I try to do that with our dog.
Yeah. Well, but our dog doesn't
work.
She doesn't make little gurgling noises. But yeah, so he would just sit there and go, wall, and the mongoose would go mind. Oh, no, close. Walla.
Wow. Okay.
And eventually,
this is clearly before the internet.
Yes. Yeah. He's got
didn't have or TV.
He's got a lot of time on his hands.
Yeah.
So he sure enough, through this method, teaches the mongoose how to talk, teaches Gef how to talk in pretty spectacular speed, I think. Because, September 1931 is when this started. And, never mind. I thought I had a date here, but I was looking at the date that Gef claimed they were born. So Gef told Irving.
So we don't know if Jeff's a boy or a girl. It's just Gef is...
I believe Jeff's a boy because the name Jeff's usually a boy's name.
Okay.
So I forgot. There's another twist here, which we find out right now about Gef the mongoose. There's another, besides the fact that he's a talking mongoose, another element that I forgot.
Okay.
He's not. He's actually the ghost of a talking mongoose. Or the talking ghost of a mongoose, I guess.
Is he
I guess he's the talking ghost of a mongoose.
You lost me.
Because he didn't learn to talk until he became a ghost.
Is he
the whole time we've known
so
him,
it's not it's not like a demon has entered his body, has taken over his body.
No, he doesn't have a body. At least right now he doesn't.
Oh.
We
haven't
still hasn't seen him.
So, okay.
So
James is teaching this creature inside the wall how to talk.
He's teaching him through the wall.
Right.
There were these two teenagers a couple of years later, Harry Hall and Will Cuban. They would play catch with Gef through a hole in the wall. They would bounce like a rubber ball through this hole in the wall, and Gef would catch it and throw it back. And Gef would also play heads or tails with them. But then sometimes he'd start spitting at them and tell them that he was going to piss on their heads.
Oh, wow. So he sounds like a normal teenage boy.
Oh, Jeff?
Yeah.
Jeff's not a teenager because
Ah.
Jeff claims that he had been born in Delhi, India on Monday, June 7th, 1852. So that makes Jeff like 80 years old. But that's combined mongoose years and ghost years. We don't know how long he's been a ghost. Presumably, mongoose don't live to be like 75. And,
Right.
and this isn't, he's a recent ghost. I don't know if he ever explained how he got to the Isle of Man from India.
Okay.
Because you don't typically hear about ghosts moving around, you
But
know?
if he was in the form of a mongoose, could he have like hitched a ride on a boat or something? Little critter on like a ship?
Yeah, but you're saying before he became a ghost or after he became a ghost?
I don't think logic is coming into this question.
Because when you're like regular ghosts, you don't hear a story about like, oh yeah, this ghost was like haunting this place for a while, but then he went in a car. The pizza guy came one night and dropped off pizza, and he didn't know the ghost went in his car, and then he went to the pizza guy's house, and he started living there from now on. You don't hear about that.
That is true.
Ghosts typically stay in one place
That's
or
true.
follow a person.
Okay, I'll get to it.
So so now that he's learned to talk, he says, for years I could understand all that was said. I tried to talk but couldn't until you taught me. And he claims that, like I said, that he was born in India and that he was there to haunt him with weird noises and clanking chains.
So he's like one of those ghosts from
Christmas.
A Christmas Carol.
Not Bob Marley. Bob Marley?
That's certainly not Bob Marley.
Old Man Marley. No, is that the guy from the Home Alone that lived next door?
I don't know.
Anyway, he's telling him like I'm here to haunt you. He doesn't really get into why. But then later he tells him, actually, like that was all made up. What I really am is just an extra, extra clever mongoose. There's nothing supernatural about me. I'm just very smart.
Okay.
He would apparently lampoon, as they said back then, the Irvings. He would compare James Irving to a Dickens character, which, is kind of like, I guess, maybe speaking of Bob Marley and Dickens. But so I guess, I don't know. He's like, look at you. You look like Tiny Tim or the guy from one of the two cities in that tale.
One of the guys.
But then he would also tell him that his head looked like an onion, which is pretty funny. And then Margaret, he was a little different. He was a little... Jeff would be canceled nowadays for this kind of behavior. He would watch Margaret disrobe before bed, and he would call out the name of each item of clothing or underclothing as she removed them.
Oh, good God.
So he'd just be in the wall going, "Pussy."
So he...
Oh, I forgot to mention, he speaks 2 octaves higher than a normal voice. He is apparently a very high, very squeaky voice.
It just dawned on me that you wanted to tell this story so you could do impressions of Jeff.
No, it hadn't even occurred to me. I was just thinking I have to give an example here, and I needed to share the information that I knew that Jeff spoke with a high-pitched voice.
So he's a creep, and he's kind of mean, but like a little bit
he's
in
like
a funny, sometimes in a funny way, sometimes in an actual mean way.
Yeah, he kind of has mood swings. But yeah, I forgot to mention, they first saw him in their yard, and they said he looked similar to a weasel with a small body, long bushy tail, flat nose, and yellow in color. And oddly, his appearance did not alarm the chickens. And normally a weasel is around chickens. They're get out of here. We don't want anything to do with this. I'd assume a weasel would kill a chicken and eat it. So later it was seen inside the house, this eerie weasel, as I thought he might be, then began to keep us awake at night by blowing, spitting, and growling behind the matchboard partition of the lower rooms. That's what I was saying earlier. A high and screechy voice. He's got some other abilities. So, like I said,
What?
They have a daughter named Vori.
Okay.
And the daughter was in the house one day and saw Gef look like a cat. Gef turned into a cat, but then disappeared.
What?
And then told Jim later. Oh, Jim was telling his wife later that night, like, oh, this is the. Oh no, I'm gonna start that over actually. Okay, so Gef had other abilities besides just being mean, I guess.
Like what?
This is like a year later, 1932. James and his daughter, they're alone in the house, broad daylight. And then to his surprise, inside the house, he sees a tiger.
All right.
Or at least a very large cat striped like a tiger. I thought, this is no ordinary cat. So maybe like a mountain lion size.
Gosh, that's big.
Yeah. It was big enough that he knew that's not like a
That's
cat.
not
That
a
thing
cat.
could mess me up. So he reached for his gun and I think like followed it outside, but then disappeared. It ran into the field or whatever. He didn't see it. And so later that night, Margaret's home, presumably not disrobing at the moment because
I certainly hope not.
But he's telling her, hey, Margaret, the damnedest thing happened today. A tiger came in the house. I was going to shoot it, but it ran off and then disappeared. And then they hear from inside the wall, it was me you saw, Jim. I'm sorry. It was me you saw, Jim.
No.
So Jeff's just like listening to their conversations 24/7.
So this is just
like
a complete, like, he's
no
kind of a
boundaries.
chaos agent
Yeah.
and just ruining these people's lives and sense of reality.
Yeah. He also apparently could turn invisible.
Well, that's convenient.
Yeah. So they would see things kind of like move around on their own, which some people think this whole thing was just a poltergeist. And it was, maybe really weird poltergeist, I guess. It was like, you know what, I'm going to shake things up a bit instead of just doing like regular poltergeist stuff. I'm going to say I'm a talking mongoose, the ghost of a talking mongoose.
Just like change things up, be different, be unique, stand out.
Yeah. I mean, we're here talking about it, and
Absolutely.
we're not talking about, some poltergeist from 100 years ago
It's true.
because it's boring. I've heard it. Been there, done that.
Poltergeist, schmoltergeist.
There were other incidents. It wasn't just them that saw Gef, by the way. It's important to tell.
Oh, well, yeah. That was going to be my next question.
3 fisher. Well, like some of these stories are kind of like, all right, this is like 3 fishermen were sitting around and a white cat leapt up on one of the guy's laps, but then it just wasn't actually there. Like it disappeared again. There were people doing yard work nearby and they kept getting rocks thrown at them from like a nearby field. But when they would look over the fence, they couldn't find anything. Gef was also a talented singer and liked to sing along to the gramophone. His favorite record was Carolina Moon. He also liked to perform the Manx national anthem or snatches of hymns and Spanish folk songs. Often, though, he appeared to delight in tormenting the Irving parents. Oh, yeah, he threw rocks at Margaret a bunch of times, too. He lost his temper when Jim took too long opening the morning paper, crying out, "Read it out, you fat-headed gnome." Because I guess he can't, he's relying on James to open up the newspaper, and he's reading it over his shoulder.
Of course.
So
he can talk, he can read, he can sing. He's a man of many talents.
Yes.
Or a mongoose of many
yeah.
talents. Excuse me.
A Vori was suspected for a long time.
The daughter
of being a ventriloquist, and that it was her all along.
Oh.
I found out during my research of this. Did you know that like throwing your voice isn't an actual thing people can do?
No.
Like making your voice appear that it's coming from somewhere it's not?
So what? So the thing we think is ventriloquism is not.
It's apparently like misdirection. That's how they do it.
Okay.
So they're pretty sure she wasn't doing it because it happened a couple of times while she wasn't there and other people were there. And they're like, yeah, I heard it. And she's not around. Or like one time it happened and she was like 100 yards away out in the field. Like they could see her, because I guess if she wasn't around, then you might have even more reason to believe like, oh, she's on the other side of that wall, probably pretending to be Gef.
So there's all these people. This is a small village.
Yes.
I would imagine it's kind of causing quite a stir in the village. Is there like media attention? Do they bring in, I don't know, people to investigate or anything?
Yes, there's a lot of investigations that go on. Specifically, there's a man named Nandor Fodor, a psychoanalyst who comes to study the phenomenon here and see what's going on. He had become kind of like like paranormal or supernatural psychoanalyst guy. He had some interesting theories about things. He thought it was basically like Freudian inspired emotions that were causing poltergeists. He believed, which is interesting because I hear people say this now, and I didn't know this was, a theory people were throwing around 90 years ago. He believed that the poltergeist was actually caused by James.
Okay, the father.
Yeah, that James was not that James was hoaxing everybody, but that James had like such crazy emotions going on inside of him that it caused this thing into existence.
Oh, and so it was recognizable to other people as a ghost or a spirit or a paranormal.
Because apparently a lot of poltergeists happen when there's like somebody around puberty age in the house.
Because of like the heightened emotions and energy and
just like really focused mental energy that can cause these things.
I mean, they always say a lot of haunted sites are places where there was really heightened emotions and heightened experiences. So the energy is like, that's why people who are living can feel the energy there. It still lingers there.
Yeah.
So,
and why, when you hear about ghosts, it's never a ghost that's like, I tripped down the stairs.
Right.
It's like I was brutally murdered
by
somebody close to me.
I was wronged in some horrible way.
And that's why they're still hanging around. So he thought living people could conjure real hauntings with only their thoughts. He also thought, I couldn't find, without reading his entire book, exactly what his thoughts were here, but he believed there was a strong link between ghosts and sex.
Okay.
He
sounds like something Gef would be interested in hearing more about.
Right. Well, so he stayed with the Irvings for, I think, a few weeks.
Okay.
During that time, he never actually saw Gef. He never met Gef. He never heard Gef, I guess, either.
Okay.
But he did leave a letter for Gef. And if you're thinking, well, can Gef read? Yeah, Gef can read.
Yes, he can read the newspaper.
Even though he thinks the name Gef is spelled G-E-F, apparently he can.
Well, it could be like a misspelling of G-E-O-F-F.
That apparently is what it is. But I mean, that's still a misspelling.
He was learning to speak, learning to read. He did his best when he first spelled his name, and then he was stuck with it. So
Nandor Fodor, believed that Gef was the projection of a bored mind of James Irving because James was an intelligent and educated man who had enjoyed a much more lively life on the British mainland. So he basically thinks they moved out here to the middle of nowhere on the Isle of Man, and this guy's just so unhappy and bored that he's manifesting the ghost of a mongoose.
I can see that being so. It sounds like an isolating kind of existence where they're like on this property in a small village on an island,
and there's only 3 of them.
Mm-hmm. So he's spending his time teaching this voice inside the wall to speak and
finding a way to pass time.
Listen. It's all we all want, right?
Exactly. I mean, it sounded like, yes, sometimes it was frustrating. Sometimes the poltergeist he manifested with his mind would sexually harass his wife. But, other times they had a ball together.
It sounds like a weird.
Oh, yeah. The whole situation's very weird. There's other supposed evidence that they sent in, which included hair from Gef. So, like, sometimes Jeff's corporal, sometimes he's not, it seems like.
So it's like, and they kind of think of it as he's just sometimes like in the walls or hiding, or do they actually think he's invisible some of the time?
Unclear. I think their understanding of it kind of evolved as it was happening. But there are some pictures that they claim are Gef, but you don't really see anything in the pictures. It's like, oh, there's like a blurry blob there or whatever. And they're saying that's Gef. But there was also hair that was sent in for analysis and found to match their sheepdog's hair.
Oh, okay.
And there were also imprints that they took of Jeff's footprints.
Oh, like in the mud or something?
Yeah. That's one of the other things that was weird about Gef, that he had very big front paws. Like his front paws were much bigger than his back paws. His front paws were between 8 and 10 centimeters, remarkably large for an animal only 30 centimeters in length. So his hands were like a third of the size of his body. But that was what the Irvings had said. Apparently, Gef had human-like hands.
Was that just a convenient explanation for these large prints?
No, I guess they had already established that.
He had big hands?
Yeah. And then they sent in the prints later. But when the prints were analyzed, they were found to like not have any like creases or folds in them.
Oh, okay.
Like it normally would. And the analysis came to the conclusion that the paw prints were made with a stick. That they were not even like a good fake. Just somebody put a stick in the mud and, moved it around, made some paw prints, and then some modeling clay to get the prints and sent them off, thinking like, yeah, this will fool everybody. Gef didn't like having his picture taken. That's one of the reasons why there's only like a couple of pictures of him. Saying at one point, I am a freak. I have hands and I have feet. And if you saw me, you'd faint. You'd be petrified, mummified, turned into a stone or a pillar of salt. But then sometimes they did see him, so kind of weird.
So people outside of the family have claimed to actually see him too? Okay.
Yeah. He apparently went, maybe this explains how he got there. I think there were like some fishermen that claimed. No, I think it was a bus driver claimed like Gef would come hang out on the bus with him sometimes. Like just kind of.
This absolutely is like an animated movie.
An animated movie, or just like a small isolated town where everybody's gone insane from boredom and they hear like, oh, did you hear this new guy?
That is pretty exciting.
Yeah, this new guy found a great way to pass the time. He pretends that there's the ghost of a talking mongoose.
And we're going to play along because we're bored too.
Hey, I mean, he's driving the bus around the small town. The bus is probably like empty most of the day.
Yeah.
And, if you have the ghost of a talking mongoose there, it just helps pass the time. And then lastly, there's a piece of local folklore that the Dorlish Cashin farm had previously been the setting for weird phenomena. Some men digging here many years ago unearthed a flat stone covering a funerary urn which contained black ashes. They buried it in the hedge bank. A long time afterwards, and not extremely long ago, a young man hunting rabbits thought he saw a rabbit bolting to the hedge. He began pulling away the stones and soil, and while doing so, he felt something invisible pushing him back. When this happened a second time, a sudden fear took him, and he ran down the hillside till he reached home. A white stone in the hedge still marks the spot where the urn was buried. So, that could also have something to do with it, be tied into why all these mysterious happenings were happening. Yeah, and I think do you have any final questions that I haven't answered for you?
Do we know whatever happened to Gef? Did it just sort of like he disappeared one day and the family, moved away or died out or whatever, and we just...
It kind of sounds like, there wasn't as much attention anymore.
The excitement wore off.
Yeah. So, if he was still around, maybe nobody was kind of keeping track or, they were like, all right, how many times can we print a newspaper story about this guy who says he's got a talking mongoose that lives in his house? But in 1970, his daughter, and Margaret's daughter, Vori, was interviewed. And she insisted that it was not a hoax and that she had wished it had never happened. If my mother and I had our way, we never would have told anybody about it. But father was sort of wrapped up in it. It was such a wonderful phenomenon that he had to tell people about it. In an interview by Manx Radio in 2001, Kathleen Green, a childhood friend of Vori's, said that Vori had been an accomplished ventriloquist. Oh, I talked about that already. Yeah, that just goes into the ventriloquist.
I mean, her saying that it was really her dad emotionally heightened, and that kind of speaks to what that Nandor guy was saying about where it was coming all from him, his energy, his emotions, and it was affecting the rest of the family. And a situation like that where your wife and your daughter are in the same household as you and are kind of also getting wrapped up in it and can't decipher
what's real
and what's not. Yeah.
The whole family's having fun.
And then if the town's kind of getting in on it, if these like exciting researchers from mainland UK.
It sounds like the two of them, the mom and daughter, like I think they didn't like the attention. So it doesn't sound like they necessarily didn't like Gef, although I'm sure that happened occasionally.
Do we think Dad liked the attention?
That's what it sounds like, that they were saying like he was the one who, had to run and tell everybody about what was going on. I think they probably realized nobody's going to believe us. This Gef guy's tricky. We don't even see him a lot of times. But, hey, Dad, let's just keep this to ourselves. But he couldn't keep that from the other residents of the Isle of Man. He knew how bored they were too, and said they're going to love hearing about this.
He really did everyone a favor.
Yeah.
Make things exciting for a few years.
So do you think, what do you think?
Tom, I went into this skeptical about the reality of talking mongoose. And I'm leaving this episode feeling even more skeptical about the...
But do you think it was a projection of James's mind, like his energy created this force?
Well, that I don't know.
Yeah.
That I even think that. I think maybe there is like an explanation that's a little bit more of like an emotional one that
shared hallucination.
I mean, potentially. Yeah. How about you?
I think it's 100% real.
Yeah, of course you do.
Jeff's telling the truth.
He sings.
I think he's both a very, very clever mongoose and also the ghost of a mongoose that was born in Delhi, India.
In the 1800s.
Like 80 years before.
Well, we agree to disagree.
All right, that's all the time we have for this episode.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.